Margaret Carney, and I'm the curator of the International Museum of Dinnerware Design in Ann Arbor, Michigan. I want to welcome you to the second of our presentations that we've titled Unforgettable Dinnerware. And I want to thank the Ann Arbor District Library for hosting the event once again. And I want to do a couple of housekeeping things. One is that you're all muted until we have the Q&A session. And I want to show a platter that Eva Zeisel signed in 1999. Before I forget it. It's the only show and tell thing I brought this evening. And you know I love show and tell. So you may be wondering also in housekeeping duties on how you can be more actively involved with the museum. And you could be a sustaining member right now, or after this program is over, you could be a sustaining member by going to our website at dinnerwaremuseum.org. And then perhaps you think you're board member material. So you could also go to our website and email me at director@dinnerwaremuseum, and perhaps you could serve on our board of directors. And before we begin the formal presentation, which is a conversation, so informal presentation this evening about Eva Zeisel, I want you to know about how much Eva meant to me and for the founding of the museum in 2012. So around the year 2000, Eva and I had an actual conversation pertaining to the concept of starting a dinnerware museum. And throughout the years, she was a great inspiration to me and really helped get the museum going. We first met Eva in 1995 when she was invited to be the keynote speaker for the design division of the American Ceramic Society in Indianapolis. And I think it was the next year that she convinced my husband, Bill Walker, and myself to rent a truck and to drive to East Liverpool, Ohio, so that we could retrieve her, well, they were about 50-year-old molds, the Hallcraft China molds from Hall China. And we did that. We took them back to Alfred. They were in our barn, and we came up with the idea of having an exhibition of those molds with the work in front. And I have, there's a picture of Eva in front of you, but I'm going to wave this little booklet. We did a booklet that shows the molds were dirty on the outside, but they were like snow on the inside. And we displayed the open molds, the original Hallcraft molds from the 1950s with her designs. And it was really a lot of fun. And I think that's one of the things I learned from Eva, was about having a lot of fun. And then the next year, Eva received the BIMS medal, and that was in 1998. And I love this photograph of her, and Susan Peterson also received the BIMS medal that year. Now, our collection is full of wonderful pieces that Eva designed, but I only have 2 minutes tonight before we join that conversation. So I just wanted to show you a couple of Stromberg pieces in our collection from the 1920s. This is a butter dish. And I said I wouldn't talk about them. The Hallcraft tomorrow is classic and white, and then with the design on it. Also the, keep going there, the teapots. Can't go fast enough here. The teapots, some of the variety of decals and decorations that were on the pieces. And the original molds that were used in the UK in order to reproduce Eva's Hallcraft line. And they were sold by Crate and Barrel, but Jeannie Richards donated this wonderful mold to the museum. So we have that. And then also the Hallcraft in matte black, which I love. My favorite line is the Museum of Modern Art's commissions that Eva did in the 1940s. And then I'm showing the dinnerware that we eat off of, which is the same the same line, but with different decorations on them. And now, because you didn't come to hear me talk tonight, I want to introduce our presentation, which is called Eva Zeisel, An Unforgettable Designer, An Unforgettable Life. And our conversation tonight is with Eva's daughter, Jean Richards. We're so happy to have her with us tonight. Jean is an actor, and she has presented herself on Broadway and off Broadway and in regional theater. She has attended the High School for Music and the Arts and also the Yale Drama School. And she's known for a wide variety of voiceovers. And she's also given a number of talks about her mother before, and maybe some of you have attended those. She will be in conversation with collector Scott Vermillion, who's a Chicago-based product and graphic designer. He's a design historian and an author and a collector of 20th century objects. He first became acquainted with Eva Zeisel and her designs in the year 2000. And I'm pretty sure during this conversation that he and Jean will discuss more about that. So without further ado, it's my honor to welcome Jean and Scott this evening. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Margaret. Thank you, Margaret. Eva would be so pleased that she has so many things in your museum. And thank you to the library, thank you to Ryan, and thank you to Scott for agreeing to do this with me. So I want to start with a quote from Eva. It's a deceptively simple quote, but it really encapsulates her career or her point of view. The quote is, "Beautiful things make people happy." That shows, first of all, that everything she designed, she aimed to make it beautiful. And she assumed that everybody can appreciate beauty. But she also wanted to make people happy. That is, she didn't do it for self-expression. She designed her pieces as gifts for others. And one of the recipients of the gifts, of course, is Scott, who is a collector extraordinaire, knows more about Eva's designs than I do. And because they're all so good to touch, we wanted Scott to show you some of the pieces in his collection.
Well, I started collecting your mother's work in 1990, and I had found this mixing bowl along with 4 Marmites in a thrift store in Chicago. And I could just tell it was a beautiful design. I mean, it was obviously designed to put your thumb there, and it had a great pouring spout. So something that was really nice to hold, but it's unmarked. So I didn't know what it was, and I wasn't collecting dinnerware at the time. And so I got home and I was excited to find out that it was designed by your mother, and even more excited to find out that she was considered one of the premier industrial designers of the 20th century. So that started me on a search for all of this. This is Red Wing Town and Country. So that started me on a collecting binge for the next year, collecting everything I could of Town and Country. And then actually I got the honor to meet your mother sometime in maybe 1992 or so, and that fueled me even more. So I continued my collecting. Your mother designed so many wonderful sets of dinnerware. So another set I really cherish is her Monmouth dinnerware, where she combined folk art pieces. I mean, the bird shape is such an old design. I mean, I think they even find bird shaped pieces in Egypt. And she managed to take this very familiar folksy kind of design motif and combine it to make it more modern and contemporary. And I know it was one of your mother's favorite lines to design, because this line, I think, has 54 pieces in it. It's just a huge line of dinnerware. And I also love the fact that when I came to visit your mother's house one time, she kept a decoy from your family in her foyer, which had the same turn back head. And I know she was inspired by that piece when she designed this line. And then one other piece I really enjoy and love is, this is a wine bottle from her Highland high fashion line. This was the last dinnerware that she designed in, I believe, 1964. And I just love it because it does a couple things. It has this curvaceous shape. All of Eva's designs just had these wonderful female-oriented curves. I also love the...
They were a bit sexy, her designs.
Yes, very much. But I also love the fun and joy of this. I always think this piece reminds me of the bottle from my Dream of Jeannie. So it's just a really fun and beautiful piece, and just very unique. So that's why I love your mother's work.
Well, I made a list of adjectives that, from my point of view, describe Eva. I call her Eva when I write about her. When I spoke to her, I would call her Mom. She was cheerful, optimistic. She was warm and generous. She was generous to a fault. She was curious about the world, curious about people and places and cultures, deeply curious. And she was adventurous. She was up for anything, spur of the moment, always. She was also ambitious, but not ambitious in a cutthroat way, but in a way of understanding very early on that she really had to focus on her name and attach her name to her work, which she understood very early. Also, she had a good sense of humor.
Do you have a few examples of that, Jeannie, that you could share with us?
Well, you know, I was thinking of something when you showed the mixing bowl. I remember one time it was after an event, and she was sitting there, and people would tend to bring a piece from home of her design and ask her to sign it, just like Margaret showed the platter sign. So a man came in, and he had a kind of mixing bowl, and she looked at it and she said, "I'm sorry to tell you, I didn't design this one." But he was so heartbroken, and she didn't want him to feel bad, so she wrote on it, "Not Eva Zeissel."
And by the way, that was a friend of mine. I was with
Oh,
I
was
was
it a
with
friend
him.
of yours?
Yes.
He still has
So
it.
there's a connection there. Yes.
Yeah. And I remember another time she had given some lecture at Pratt Institute. She was probably 95, and a young student raised his hand and said, "Mrs. Zeissel, to what do you owe your very long life?" And there was this long pause, and she said, "No sport." That got a big laugh. Anyway, so that was her. Generally, she had a nice sense of humor in her life, in her everyday life. I thought I should tell you a little something about how she grew up. So Eva was born in Budapest in 1906. Her mother was one of the first people to get a PhD in the university. Both her mother and her grandmother, the mother's mother, were ardent feminists. Eva's mother, can you imagine, in 1905 gave a speech for advocating equal pay for equal work for women. Not that seems to have helped, but anyway, she did. But by the time it got down to Eva, she wasn't a feminist anymore at all, because she just figured she could do whatever she wanted to do. And her father was a handsome businessman who owned a textile factory. And from a very early age, maybe 9 or 10, Eva sketched. She sketched all the time, inside and outside, kept sketching, then painted. She was tutored in painting by famous Hungarian painters in her home. This is one of her paintings. She probably did this later. This is a portrait of her brother. And then she attended the Hungarian Academy of Fine Arts as a painter, and it was assumed she would be a painter. And her friends were getting ready to starve in the garret and paint, but she decided that was not how she wanted to live. She had a conference with her mother, and they decided that she should learn a trade or a craft to help support her painting, herself as a painter. So she did something kind of unusual for a young lady of that time. She became an apprentice to the last master potter of the Hungarian guild system in Hungary. His name was Mr. Karapansik, great name. And I'm going to read you the name of the guild because it's hard to remember. It was the Hungarian Guild of Chimney Sweeps, Oven Makers, Roof Tilers, Well Diggers, and Potters. And there she learned about clay from the base up. Not only choosing the clay, but they had to mush the clay with their bare feet. Then they put it through a mangle. I don't really know what a mangle is, but they put it through it. Then they worked on the wheel and made vases and other objects. They fired it overnight, and then they took it to market the next day or when it dried to sell. And after 6 months, she graduated as a journeyman, which is the next step up. First thing she did was, we can show the picture of this, Scott. She, not this one, this is the painting here. She opened her own little pottery on the family property in the gardener's house. And here she is at age probably 18 with her various designs. But after a while, she put an ad in the newspaper, and she wanted a real job, not just at home. So she advertised journeyman, trained from the ground up, and she accepted a job in Hamburg. This shop was right on the edge of the red light district of Hamburg, which was somewhat of an eye-opener for a young lady of good family. When she arrived, there were 4 ceramic wheels. 3 of them were occupied by kind of tough men. And on her wheel, as she always described it, was a gift for her. And she described it very delicately. She said it was a perfectly formed clay male organ, which she just brushed aside. And eventually she got the respect of the people she worked with. She worked there quite a few months. At a certain point, the master there, the owner of the shop, noticed that he was going to fire her because she didn't really make everything exactly the same. That was hard for her. But he did notice that she could make things very different. And he kept her on as a designer, and she designed a lot of kind of strange things. Anyway, that was the end of Hamburg. After a little break, I think, traveling, she saw an ad in the newspaper for a designer, and it was from the Schramberger Majolika Fabrik, which was a factory in a small town in the Black Forest of Germany. And they advertised for a designer, which they accepted her, and she accepted the job. And on the train on the way there, a friend showed her how to draw a design with a compass and a protractor and a ruler, because everything that she had done up till then had been on the wheel, three-dimensional. So when she arrived and they asked her, would you prefer to make your samples on the wheel or draw a design? She said, of course, design. And that was her first real job as an industrial designer. We'll get to this. Leave it on a second. She worked there for almost 2 years. She worked very hard, 12-hour days. She designed hundreds of pieces. She kept 250 or 300 workers busy for all that time. And as you can see here, she used geometry. I have to say, she did say that the first thing she designed after drawing with her compass, she was a little surprised how it looked in 3 dimensions, but obviously she got used to it. She used geometry, as you can see here, in a playful way. Some art historians thought that because the Bauhaus and she used geometry, she was clearly influenced by them. But she said something much more interesting. She said geometry was in the air, and it had been introduced by Cubism, and Cubism was what brought geometry to both of them. After almost 2 years, Eva left Schramberg. Probably it was kind of lonely working in the small town, but I do know that she asked them to put her name under the pieces that she designed, and apparently they refused. So she left. The next step in her life was what she called the most elegant time of her life. Her mother had rented an atelier for her and her brother in Berlin, in the studio of a former studio of famous painter named Emil Nolde. And there they gave parties Berlin was just buzzing, and she and her brother gave parties with 100 people came, artists.
Okay.
Artists and scientists and journalists and theater people. It's just wonderful. However, she did work, and it was her first opportunity to do what we do today, work from home. Because the factory, instead of going to the factory to work, the factory sent a model maker. It was the Carstens factory. They sent a model maker to Berlin, and she took a room for him in the same building. So she really worked from home. And Berlin was buzzing then, but it was kind of decadent. It was 3-penny opera time and George Groves. And she noticed that the things that came from Russia were very fresh and lovely, the children's books and the music and the theater. And she being, this was her in Berlin.
Just a quick shot of her.
Glamorous, elegant time in something she designed for herself, actually. Thank you for reminding me. So then she decided she wanted to see what was behind the mountain, being curious, one of my adjectives, and she went to visit Russia. She thought she'd be there a short time, but she was hired very quickly, and she was assigned to, she had many adventures. She was assigned to go and inspect factories. She was in Kharkov at first in the Ukraine, to go and inspect factories on the Polish border, where they had never seen a foreigner before. And she went in horse-drawn carriages through the snow with the wolves howling left and right. She had many adventures there. Then she was sent to design in the Imperial Porcelain Factory in St. Petersburg, called the Lomonosov factory. After that, she worked in the Dulova factory. You can show the picture of the yellow things. These Dulova factories, she set up an art department and designed many things there. Dulova was apparently the biggest, or almost the biggest, ceramics factory that existed in the world at that time. And after this, she became artistic director of the China and glass industry of Russia. However, soon, 3 people came early in the morning, knocked on her door, said, "Come with us, you are arrested." She had no idea what they were talking about. She was not political at all at that time. She said, I was there as a tourist. I wasn't active politically in any way. And they took her to prison, and here is her mugshot. She thought she'd be out in a few days. She was in for 16 months, 1 year of which was in solitary confinement. She asked what she was accused of, and she said, they said, "You're accused of a successful attempt to assassinate Stalin." She said, "If it was so successful, how come he's still alive?" And they said, "Don't make bad jokes." So she
looks absolutely stunning in that photo too. Beautiful.
I think the people in the prison kind of liked her, even though they were trying to get her to give false confessions. And she thought, by the way, every day that she would be shot, taken out and shot, as were other people. She was not physically tortured, but certainly emotionally tortured. I do urge you to read her memoir of her time in Russia and in prison. It's just wonderful. At the moment, it's only an electronic book. It's an Apple book and a Kindle book, but it's a good read. And also we discovered recently that Stalin was directly connected to her case. The name of the book, which you can get online, is Eva Zeisel, A Soviet Prison Memoir. Well, through various people vouching for her and trying to get her out, she was finally released from prison and expelled from Russia. We have a letter signed by Andrei Vyshinsky, who was the chief prosecutor or something, saying she is to be released. So she made her way on a train. She made her way to Vienna to recover. She was completely broken. On the train, she asked someone how old they thought she was, and they said, "Oh, not a day over 50." And she had turned 30 in prison. So there she was in Vienna, recovering. And after a while, Hitler moved in, and that was it for Eva. That same day, she took a train, she left, and she made her way to England, where my father, her fiance, my father, Hans Zeissel, followed her from Vienna. They married in England and made their way to America. They sailed for America in 1938. And when Eva saw the Statue of Liberty, tears came to her eyes. So for the first couple, they had either $64 or $68 between them when they arrived in America. So the first couple of years, both of them looked for work, got various work, and also.
How did they get a job at Pratt? How did your mother get a job?
Well,
at
wait.
Pratt?
First, I want to tell you before that. That's okay. She got a job at Pratt, but before that, I found many letters, tremendous, intense time trying to get the friends and family out of Russia, out of Europe, to save their lives from Hitler. So Pratt one of her little jobs was working with plaster in the plaster room at Pratt Institute. And she somehow got the attention of Alexander Costello, who had just founded the industrial design department at Pratt Institute. And he invited her to teach a course. I guess they must have talked to each other. I don't know on what basis he did that, but she taught there for the next 15 years. She invented the course. It had never been taught before. It was called Ceramics for Industry. And most of the students were a little bit older guys because they were there on the GI Bill. And she said, there were some women too. And she said that in the beginning of the semester, they were kind of wary of each other. And by the end of the semester, they loved each other. And she taught them, among other things, communication of emotions and feelings through their designs, which was really, I would say, her specialty. But she also wanted the students to see their work from beginning to end. And so she got them hooked up with a factory, a small factory in New Jersey, the what was it called? Bay Ridge Company. And there they produced the students' work and they could participate to the final product. And I think she also designed a few things there for that factory. And afterwards, the student work was exhibited in New York City, I think, in Rockefeller Center. And indirectly, that led to the most important commission Eva ever got in her life. Someone came to see the exhibition. His name was Elliot Noyes. He was the curator of industrial design at the Museum of Modern Art. And she invited him then to a lecture she was giving at the Metropolitan Museum on handicraft and mass production. And then he offered her, Scott, you want to introduce it?
Sure. So Castleton China started in 1942, and it was co-founded by someone who had been involved with Rosenthal in Germany. And when they created Castleton, they wanted to create America's first formal porcelain dinnerware line. And the head of Castleton knew Elliot Noyes and asked Elliot Noyes for his advice on who he should hire to design this line. And because of Elliot's connection with your mother, and he knew that she was also very familiar with working in factory conditions, that he recommended her. And that's how she got the commission for this beautiful set of dinnerware.
The set was, the requirements were that it looked like an heirloom, very elegant.
Yes.
It was expensive. And the museum had to approve each piece. They never asked for changes, but they didn't include all the pieces. And the thing is, in 1946, this set was exhibited at the Museum of Modern Art. She was the first, here's the exhibit. She was the first woman to have a one-man show at the Museum of Modern Art. And that show had got lots of publicity, and she felt that's what really put her on the map as a designer in America. Now, her next commission was completely different. It came from a small town on the Mississippi River in Minnesota, Red Wing, Minnesota, and they asked her to design a Greenwich Village-y set. And she did. By the way, she also visited that factory, as she would visit all the factories, told me she had gone catfishing with the owner in a boat on the Mississippi, which was part of her adventure.
I love that.
Yeah. So this was part of the Greenwich Village set. It was called a Town and Country set. And it's mix and match colors. And it also had a particular salt and pepper shaker. And the bowl, right? And it had a salt and pepper shaker, which were remind one of mother and child. They were based on that. And here's a picture on the left of me and Eva illustrating what was behind this salt and pepper shaker. Before we get to the next big set, which was her best-selling set, you might like to know a little bit about what it was like growing up with Eva. So we had an upstairs and we had a downstairs in 115th and Riverside Drive in Manhattan. upstairs, we lived on the 5th floor, and there were big windows overlooking the Hudson River. It was just lovely. We lived in 5C, and Eva's mother and father, my grandparents, lived in 5D. That's a very important point, because when Eva went on business trips, sometimes to visit factories, sometimes to work there, it was my grandmother who took care of me and my brother. My brother John is 4 years younger than I am. We always had some kind of housekeeper or person coming in to clean or living with us, because Eva hated housework, just hated it. The only part of it that she loved was cooking. And she was a wonderful, very spontaneous cook. She made soups and stews and some kind of spur of the moment cake, which I never figured out how she made. And our life up there in 5C wasn't overly structured. And I always laughed with my friend Kathy, who lived downstairs, about the little Hungarian cleaning lady who came, tore her hair out, ran around the apartment saying, "What this house needs is a system, a system." I don't know if we had a system, but anyway, our life wasn't boring. Then there was downstairs. Eva had rented the basement, and she had built herself the most beautiful, elegant studio you can imagine. It had curved white walls and white curtains. It had cantilever desks. Here is Eva sitting at one of the cantilever desks. She's actually making models out of wire for a chair she designed, which will show you what happened to the chair. Here it is much later on display at the Museum of Modern Art. The studio had brightly colored rugs, and the rest was white. It had a dark room, it had a model making room, and it had something quite interesting, which she invented, called aging cabinets. So the idea about the aging cabinets was this. Her sequence of design was, it began with on paper, then with plasticine, then plaster model, and then the plaster model, which was either molded or done on the wheel in the shop there, that was sent to the manufacturer, who sent back a sample. And this sample went back and forth between the factory and Eva until Eva proved it. And she included in the studio the aging cabinets, very nice lit cabinets, where she would put the samples and let them sit to see how she thought they went together or whether she still liked them. And that was the aging cabinets. Now the children, me and my brother, were welcome in the studio anytime, after school, anytime. But there was also a little talk back button under one of the desks in the studio, between the studio and the apartment. And Eva would say, sometimes in the middle of a business meeting, my little brother would call down and say, "Billy kicked me. Should I kick him back?" And that was a story that Eva told. But not only were we welcome there, she gave us fantastic parties twice a year. My brother separately, me separately, the whole class was invited. They were arts and crafts parties at Easter and at Christmas. At Easter, we decorated eggs, and Christmas, we made Christmas decorations. Anyway, we were very much a part of her design life. So should we go on to
Yes.
the next set? If you would introduce it, please.
Sure. So in 1953, your mother had the idea to design an affordable dinnerware set made of earthenware that she worked with commercial decal, with the idea that the dinnerware could be either sold in all white or could be a canvas for dozens of patterns that commercial decal provided. And it ended up becoming what we see here, Hallcraft, Tomorrow's Classic, and it became one of the best-selling dinnerware lines of the 1950s.
Yeah, it was well priced. It sold very, very well. It was not expensive. It was earthenware, not porcelain. And yes, it was one year it was the most popular set. By the way, the studio, I forgot to say, was peopled. It had a secretary and several design assistants who had been taken from her Pratt students. And those design assistants were the ones who made the first few patterns for this set under Eva's supervision. After, let's show the next thing. I think it's the glasses.
Yep.
Federal?
There we go.
Okay. So Eva not only designed in porcelain, she designed in glass and metal and plastic and fabric rugs, all kinds of materials. And she had designed glasses that were hand blown and very elegant, but these glasses were made by Federal Glass in huge machines, mass produced. The machines spat out these glasses 1 per second. They were sold all over the world. She did a little trick with them because they were very cheap glasses. She tried to make the base look solid. It was actually an illusion. It's not quite solid as it looks, but that made them look more valuable and more expensive. If we have time, there was one moment when she had gotten 3 samples back from Federal Glass, each with a slightly different bottom. She called it a different amount of silver. And at that moment, Mr. Capasso was picking up our trash. And she asked him to come up and asked him which of the 3 he liked. And he picked one, and indeed she did choose it. This was so...
I said, good choice.
Good choice. This was so popular and sold so widely that she'd go to an airport in some other country, and there they'd be. And she said it was just like seeing my children. And one funny story, some years ago when my daughter was maybe 8, my husband, she and I went on a trip to Venezuela and found ourselves in a small town in the Andes. And a tour guide, a young man, came and said, "Would you like to see a typical Venezuelan house? Follow me." And we followed him up literally 1 full mile in the rainforest, in the rain, not dressed for it, and arrived at the top. And there was a house and a big fire, happened to be his sister's house. And she looked at us and said, "Oh my God, you need a drink here." And she handed us a drink in Eva's Federal Glass.
That's amazing.
This is incredible. It was really very funny. Okay, let's show the next. Now, this slide we put together because people very often asked what inspired or influenced Eva's design choices. So one thing, as Scott showed before, with the birds, which were a very big part of her Hungarian folk tradition. Birds were used in embroidery, many, many things. She was inspired by nature. She was inspired by the human body. And I'm almost embarrassed to say that the theme of belly buttons ran through many of her designs. Here in the upper left, you see the belly button space dividers, but they were also on the middles of plates and on handles of on tops of things. Anyway, belly buttons was a big theme. And one time there was a birthday party for Eva, I think her 95th, at the Museum of Modern Art. And the curator got up and he said, Philip Johnson was influenced or inspired by machines, and Eva was inspired by babies' bottoms. So there you have it. So at that point, in the late 60s and 70s, Eva took a break. She took a break from designing. Many American factories had closed down. I don't know if that was the reason, but in the late 60s, she became very active politically for the first time, demonstrating against the Vietnam War, which touched her very deeply. She was really against all war, but she was very active against that, took us all down to Washington to march. She also got involved in an American history research project, which is too complicated right now to explain, but it reminded her in some ways of things she had gone through in Russia in prison. It had to do with slaves in New York City, but we'll do that the next time. And then she did go back to designing in the 80s. She did some lovely things for factories in Hungary, particularly one with iridescent glazes. And then she got enamored with wood and just started designing up a storm in wood, designed furniture and shelves and display cases and for stores. Just, she got enamored with wood. And one of the tables, beautiful oval coffee table, ended up sold, I believe, at Design Within Reach. Then in the year 2000, she was invited back to Russia, to the same factory where she had worked in the 1930s. And being adventurous, another one of my adjectives, she said, well, of course I'll go. But first, she said, I need a letter saying it's okay to go back because I was expelled from Russia. I want to make sure it's okay. She got the letter. And then she said, I'm way too old. She was 94. She said, I'm way too old to travel by myself. I have to take my daughter, my son-in-law, and my granddaughter. So all of us had a very interesting 10 days in St. Petersburg. And Eva was ostensibly invited there to critique the new designs of the factory. And she did. And after that, she immediately sat down at a wheel with Georgy Bogdovich, their model maker, excellent model maker, and started designing a set. No one had asked her to design a set, but she couldn't be held back. And here is a picture of the eventual set. Of course, it couldn't be finished in 10 days. So later, the factory sent Georgie to America to continue making plaster models and working with Eva to finish it. This set, the Lomonosov tea set, I think it's called Talisman, after my daughter, our daughter, is still being made today in St. Petersburg and sold there. It's, in my opinion, the most beautiful set Eva ever designed. Yeah. The material is so thin, the light shines through it. And to me, it looks like frozen milk. It's just gorgeous. So that was probably the last full set she designed, but she continued designing lamps and various other things. And I want to show you the very, very last thing she designed because I covet it and I have it here on the shelf. Now, take a look at it. By the way, the pieces of tape are not part of it. It just looks like a metal sculpture. But of course, Eva never designed anything just as a sculpture. It always had a use. So here's the use.
Oops.
It's an egg cup, one of them for one egg and one of them for two eggs. Unfortunately, most Americans prefer omelets to soft-boiled eggs for breakfast, so it was never made. It might be made sometime, maybe in silver wire or stainless steel, but I want to end by telling you something kind of bittersweet. Towards the very end of her life, by the way, she designed those, she was way over 100. She designed them with her friend, Kirko Wolfram. A journalist came at the very end of Eva's life, and he asked her two questions. First, he said, what is your favorite color? And she said, orange. That was easy. And then he said, do you have any regrets in your life? She thought a long time, and then she said in a very quiet voice, I should have been a painter. And I said, Mom, how could you say? But that's what she said.
And we wouldn't have had this beautiful dinnerware if we had become a painter.
Yeah, exactly. Scott, is there anything you want to add?
We'd like to let everyone know where to find Eva today. A lot of her designs are still in production, and you can see all of this information at evazeisel.com. You can buy pieces at evazeiseloriginals.com. There's presence on Facebook. There's the book, Eva Zeisel, Life, Design, and Beauty. And there's pieces still being made. My friend works at Philsfelt, and there's commercial pieces that are absolutely beautiful. So take a look at this. And then we'd like to, again, encourage you to become a member of the International Museum of Dinnerware Design.